Hey guys, so sorry I guess lied. I said I'd be doing weekly to bi-weekly, and then 3 months later I haven't posted again. I can make up some long ass excuse, but instead I'm just gonna get right into the book because I know that's what you're here for. So here we are with Shadows, the horror movie heroes, and it is by Clouds. My Head in Clouds, Not Coming Down. Chapter 4, Potential. Summary: great theory, poor execution. It felt like Kachin was getting worse. Maybe Izuku was imagining it, but ever since he got captured by the sludge villain, Kachin was about twice as mean as he had been. He must be compensating for being caught as the victim and trying to regain either a sense of control or a sense of power, but in the end, it didn't matter what he had led to change. It just mattered that Izuku stayed out of his attack radius as much as humanly possible. That wasn't an option during class, unfortunately, especially since most of his teachers would turn a blind eye to Izuku getting tripped, burned, or even hurt if it meant that Kachin wouldn't interrupt the class. But after class was when the worst beatings happened anyway. So if he could just stay out of sight for long enough for Kachin to leave, then Izuku could go hang out with Shinzo at the park. He just had to stay out of sight. Izuku looked around for somewhere to hide. Inside a locker would be fine if he had a guarantee that he could get out, but if the locker latched and he got trapped, then it would defeat the whole purpose of hiding in the first place. Empty classrooms weren't safe bet because Kachin would send his lackey to check those, and if he tried going to a teacher, it would make things worse. If only there were some ways to give himself an advantage, take the high ground. Izuku almost stopped in his tracks to hit him. Take the high ground. Sure, Katsuki could easily reach him with his explosions, but that was only if he thought to look up. Izuku sped up and skidded around the corner, making beeline for the trophy case. Kachin had pretty much won every award offered, so his name and face were featured multiple times, while Izuku may as well not be a student. That didn't matter though. What mattered was the case didn't go all the way to the ceiling. There was about a foot of space on top with a little decorative lip on the edge of the case that should be enough to mostly hide him if he laid down completely flat. Izuku grabbed a chair from an empty classroom and used it to try and scramble up the side of the case, accidentally kicking it aside as he did. It took all of his strength to get up on top of it, but he finally managed it with a grunt. It was hard to breathe, his breath with all the dust, so he covered his mouth and did his best to muffle how hard he was panting. This entire plan would be for nothing if Kachin heard him and found his hiding place. It was only a few seconds after Izuku had settled in that Kachin and a couple of other classmates rounded the corner. Kachin had a murderous expression in his eyes, and he looked down the hallway in both directions. "You extras split up and find that damn nerd. I'm gonna take a look around here." His lackeys nodded, and one took off in either direction, while Kachin looked around. He peeked his head into each of the other classrooms, and Izuku had to fight off the disappointment when he didn't look into any of them for more than a few seconds. Then Kachin saw the chair on the floor, and his eyes narrowed. Izuku couldn't help himself as he started trembling. If Kachin found him, was there anything he could even do? If he was just stronger, then he could have gotten up there quicker and not had to use the chair. He shouldn't have left any evidence that Kachin could use to find him. Hiding seemed like the perfect plan at the time, but if it didn't work, then it would just make everything worse. He needed to get better with thinking ahead and strategizing for every possibility and not just the one he hoped would happen. Stupid dust. If he was going to be hiding in places this frequently, he needed to start carrying around a mask. Kachin was getting closer, and Izuku clamped his hands over his mouth again as he felt a sneeze coming. He hated this. He hated being so terrified, and as much as he hated it, what made it even worse was that Kachin didn't even know what it was like. With the exception of the sludge villain, he'd never been the victim. He didn't know what it was like to live in fear like Izuku did. His mind was racing through all the research he'd done since he met Sutenzo, and Izuku knew that there was 500,000 strategies that he could use. But if he tried them and failed, then it would just make Kachin even more angry than he was right now. Plus, there was the fact that Izuku was pretty sure that Kachin's fight and flight response would mostly be geared towards fight, which meant that a fake-out strategy wasn't going to work here like it did with the sludge villain. What was he supposed to do? Kachin's eyes slide from the chair to the trophy case and to Izuku on top. He gulped. Too late. There you are, Deku. Found you, Kachin smirked. Kyoka wasn't quite sure what to think of her new teacher. Dad was always so gung-ho about taking advantage of new opportunities and never saying no to an adventure. But he was also impulsive and had a habit of not thinking things through all the way. So yeah, Dad saw absolutely nothing sketchy about some guy who supposedly worked for All Might offering to train her. But Kyoka was obviously picking up a few more red flags that merited bringing pepper spray along to her first training session. If Toshinori Yagi hadn't been listed as an employee on All Might's website, she wouldn't have shown up at all. But a little extra training from someone who actually knew the hero industry would be extremely valuable. So even though she was pretty sure he was lying about something, she decided to give him the benefit of the doubt for now. Dagobah Municipal Park Beach. When Yagi told her the meeting place, she'd been expecting more. Well, just more. The park, if she could even call it that, was so disused that the people had started using it as a public dump site. If there had ever been a playground anywhere here, it had been long since buried beneath literal mountains of trash. Yagi, of course, blended right in, so it took her a minute to realize that he'd beaten her there and was already standing on the boardwalk, looking out over the ocean. Kyoka wrinkled her nose and winced as every minuscule creak in the wood made her start picking up her way to him. No offense, but this perfect training ground you picked is kind of a mess. Yagi jumped and gave her a sheepish smile. Oh, young Jiro, I didn't see you there. Jiro gave him a skeptical look. So, are we gonna train or what? Yes, of course. Yagi snapped into action and started making his way back to the beach, with much less care than she had taken, most likely because he couldn't hear every concerning creak the wood made as they put their weight on it, but they somehow managed to reach the sand without the boardwalk collapsing underneath them. Kyoka breathed a sigh of relief. This was definitely turning out to be an adventure. So, young Jiro, Yagi began, leading her through piles of trash. I must admit that I haven't been completely honest with you. His form started to shift. Kyoka cursed under her breath and grabbed the can of pepper spray in her pocket. Go on an adventure, Dad said. It'll be a great opportunity, he said. Kyoka swore to God that if she got murdered, she was going to haunt her father for the rest of his miserable life. She had no idea what kind of She had no idea what kind of quirk this guy had. She had no idea what kind of quirk this guy had, but from the shift in size, it was most likely some kind of monster quirk. She wasn't equipped to fight that. What could she do? Yagi had already lured her out of the side of the street, but they were still close enough that if she pepper sprayed him and bolted, maybe she would get away just before he recovered. She braced her feet, and as soon as the smoke cleared and enough for her to tell where the creature's eyes were, she fired. Bullseye! The smoke surrounding Yagi finished clearing, and Kyoko's eyes widened as she realized just who exactly she had just pepper sprayed right in the eyes as they let out a strangled cry and collapsed back on the skeletal form with a puff of steam. Oh, mate? Yes. All Mate coughed up with a small amount of blood, making Kyoko feel worse. Well, I knew you were strong enough for my quirk. Where's my phone? Here, call recovery girl. Juri was shaken as she grabbed the phone out of his hands and searched through the contacts. Thankfully, there weren't many, and recovery girl was already near the top of his recent calls. Hello? I think I might have just attacked the #1 heroes. Sorry? Hitoshi was trying to really forget to not feel betrayed. After going to Midoriya's house, he thought that they were at least partners, if not friends. But here he was, at the meeting place, alone. Midoriya didn't really strike him as the type of guy to be late, so at this point, it was probably safe to assume that he wasn't showing up at all. Maybe he'd wanted to show up and his mum hadn't let him. That was probably wishful thinking. It would have been nice if Midoriya still wanted to hang out with him, but he'd probably come to his senses and realized that he'd been using the whole fear as a weapon, and being associated with someone with a villain's quirk was kind of a bad idea in the first place. Even if it ended up working, it was still a long shot. Hitoshi sighed and jumped off the swing he'd been sitting on. He might as well go home and do his homework. He needed to make sure he could at least could pass the Gen Ed exam once he was able time to apply to UA. He shouldn't have gotten his hopes up. Shinzo! Midoriya's voice made him stop in his tracks. Sorry I'm late. I got held up, but I'm here now. Hitoshi looked Midoriya up and down. He was slightly favoring one ankle, and his uniform was singed and torn in several places. Plus, Hitoshi was fairly certain that those bandages were bandages peeking out from his sleeves. Held up by who? Held up by who? Muggers? No, Midoriya rubbed the back of his neck. Just some bullies. I really wish I could make them go away. I mean, I know how, right? But all the study we've done is just in theory. I've never really had a chance to practice being scary, you know? And I've only ever practiced being less scary. Hitoshi nodded in understanding. So, what are we gonna do about that? There's gotta be some way for us to practice. Midoriya had started muttering himself, so Hitoshi just let him talk and tried to catch as much as possible. There are haunted houses also, those might be helpful there. They probably won't hire kids our age. Wait, aren't there companies that provide civilians for rescue simulations and stuff in Heroes' Trains? I wonder if there's an opportunity for that for fake villains. If there is, that'd probably be the best. Hitoshi cut in. I mean, the point is to beat the villains at their own game, right? So pretending to be villains would probably be the most effective way to practice. Midoriya smiled and pulled out his phone. Okay, let's start there. We'll probably need a lot more physical training and maybe parkour. It would seem like it would really be useful to be able to beat villains up in mobility, and kind of try to hide in on top of a display case and roll my ankle jumping down. Was this... Hitoshi raised his eye. Was this before or after you got beat up? So that was the end of chapter 4, and we're just going to straight roll into chapter 5. And you know what, because of how long I've been away, I'll go afterwards straight into chapter 6 as well. So, chapter 5, information. Summary: knowledge is power. Hitoshi crossed yet another company off their list as Izuku dialed the net number. I think it's time we start looking into some plan Bs. Yeah, Izuku sighed as the phone rang on speaker. I was hoping this would work out, but it looks like it's not going to. The phone stopped ringing and Izuku scrambled as the voice answered on the other side. Hello, you've reached Helper's company, Huck for short. How can I help you today? Yes. Hello, Izuku said brightly. Your company provides civilians for hero training exercises, right? Yes, that would be correct, the receptionist replied. That's actually the entire point of our company. And do you ever provide other services, Shinzo asked, like villains for things like that? Not normally, the receptionist hummed. The Hero Commission normally prefers to have heroes fill those roles when possible. May I know why you're asking? You seem a little young to be hiring our services. Yeah, a little, Zuko grimaced. We're looking more along the lines of employment opportunities. We're going to be trying for hero schools next year, Shinzo clarified. So we were hoping to volunteer as villains and get some actual combat experience. That would give you an edge, the receptionist said. But unfortunately, like I said, we don't really provide that series. And even if I did, we have an age limit of at least 16 for our employees. Actually, there's a possibility. Is it alright if I put you on hold real quick? Yeah, sure, Izuku frowned and turned to Shinzo as jazzy music filled the room. Well, that's promising, Shinzo shrugged. More than the other places that just politely laughed in their faces. Izuku nodded in agreement and was about to say something when the whole music suddenly cut out. Alright, are you still there? Yeah, we're here, Shinzo added. What do you have for us? Well, it's not a guarantee, but our company has been contracted to be civilians for an upcoming training exercise, and I believe they are looking for villains as well, the receptionist said. However, they might also have an age requirement, just like we do. That's, Izuku hurried and reached for the notebook that Shinzo was practically shoving into his hands. That's better than nothing. Do you know where we can find out more? I can give you a link, the receptionist giggled. I'm glad to see you two are taking the initiative. That will be really helpful when you're heroes. Izuku's jaw dropped and he looked at Shinzo, who he could tell was having the exact same thought process. When they were heroes, not if. They were going to be heroes. After a too long moment, he shook his head. Yes, thanks, please, thank you so much. Oh, fuck, sorry. This is your own damn... Nope, wrong voice. This is your own damn fault, All Might. Recovery Girl complained. Seriously, what were you thinking? Cornering a young lady like that? Honestly, I almost wish she'd done more than just blind you. Because maybe you'd then actually learn your lesson. Kyoko sat awkwardly in the examination bed in the UA nurse's office, twisting her earphones between her fingers as Yagi, no, All Might, stood at eye wash station getting chewed out by the oldest hero Kyoko had ever seen. Yep, this was an adventure, right? I still feel bad, Kyoko fretted. I shouldn't have... Oh no, dearie, this isn't your fault that Yagi killed his brain cells years ago, Recovery Girl assured her. You have absolutely nothing to be worried about for. You have absolutely nothing to be sorry for. All Might here was acting like a creep, and you responded accordingly. As far as I'm concerned, you are more of a hero in this situation than he was. Do I make myself clear? Kyoko blinked in shock for a moment, then found herself smiling. Yes, ma'am. It's not my fault that All Might is an idiot. All Might spluttered as Recovery Girl laughed proudly. Phew, I like this one. You chose yourself a good old succession, All Might. I'm almost tempted to say you might actually have some sense. God, that sounded weird coming out of my own mouth. Like, what am I doing? Making fucking Recovery Girl fucking hell. Yep. By the way, these are just going to be left right in the video. So I'm not going to edit these to move them elsewhere. These are just going to be in the middle of the video. Like this little monologue I'm doing. Yeah, I'm lazy. Alright, I'm going to try and change up her voice. Ew. Yes, I'm going to do this type of voice for her. Not that I think she's like a duff. Anyway. Oh yes, I like this one. You chose yourself a good successor, All Might. I am almost tempted to say you might actually have some sense. Kyoko frowned. What did she mean by successor? And earlier, right after she'd sprayed him, All Might said she had a strong enough for his quirk. Whatever that meant at the time, Kyoko had been a little too preoccupied with not accidentally killing the #1 hero to worry too much about it. But even after things calmed down a little bit, Kyoko was used to overhearing things that she wasn't supposed to. Overhearing people's secret was the worst part of having a hearing quirk, but it was something she had to get used to, so Jiro had just filed All Might's weird comment as one of those mysteries she would have never had an answer to. Usually, however, those mysteries had nothing to do with her, and keeping a secret about her from her was decidedly less okay. What are you talking about? I'm not All Might's successor. He just offered some training sessions to help me get ahead before UA, or at least that's all he told me. Recovery Girl looked and hit All Might's knees with a cane. You didn't tell her? Of all harebrained, idiotic... I was getting around to it, All Might insisted. If you hadn't noticed, our original meeting was interrupted. Jiro put her foot down. What the hell are you talking about? If you're just going to argue and not actually tell me, then I'm leaving. I'm not going to waste my time sticking around with people who aren't even going to be willing to be honest with me. Recovery Girl glared at All Might, who looked as contrite as he could with his eyes still somewhat swollen from the pepper spray. We are referring to my quirk, young Jiro. It is called One for All, and I would like you to inherit it. Hitoshi stared at the screen, his jaw on Teflon because, yep, his jaw on the floor as he recognized the logo. I think the hub receptionist forgot to mention that this was an exercise for UA. No, this is even better. Midoriya nodded like he was trying to reassure himself. This way we can show our skills and abilities even before the entrance exam and make more of a memorable first impression. We just We just need to be such good villains that they realize they need us on their side. This'll work. This'll work. Hitoshi raised one eye skeptically. You're basically planning on scaring UA into thinking we'll become villains if we don't become heroes. Well, Midoriya smiled sheepishly. We are trying to entice fear. Is there an age limit? Hitoshi leaned over to read some of the text. There's no point getting our hopes up and planning on this if they're not gonna let us even participate. Midoriya quickly scrolled through the page, muttering unintelligibly to himself for a minute as he read the rules. No, actually, there's a section for minors. We need our parents to sign a waiver just in case we get injured or something. So that'll be a challenge, but it's reasonable to, and they just say minor, not a specific age, so we can definitely apply. Hitoshi smiled. Okay, that sounds good. What do we need to imply? We will need to send in basically a fake police file. All the information the police would have on us if we were like real villains. Hitoshi's face fell. Like our quirks. Midoriya got a calculating look on his face. Not necessarily. Say we train enough that I can hack into the cameras and erase footage of us, and you can make people forget that you ever brainwashed them, then we can argue that the police would reasonably remain ignorant of our quirks, and well, even our faces and identities, if we're careful enough, we can just give them just enough information to give us the advantage, all while studying the sports festival to make sure we know what quirks and personalities we're up against. Do you really think they'll allow that? Hitoshi asked skeptically. Midoriya shrugged. No, but I'm sure they'll allow us to be heroes either. I'm not sure they'll allow us to be heroes either, and we're doing it anyway. Touché. Hitoshi rolled his eyes. We're gonna be heroes. Midoriya nodded. Villains first, but yeah, we're gonna be heroes. Alright, I'm just gonna quickly grab a drink. Alright, and now we're going to go straight into Chapter 6. So, Chapter 6, Permission. Summary: adults aren't perfect either. Hitoshi nervously straightened the paper again as he and Midoriya walked up to his foster home. It wasn't like the paper that was that valuable. They just used a printer at the library to make a few copies of the permission waiver for the UA training exercise, so printing another wouldn't be a big deal or anything. But the paper felt valuable, just because of what it represented. If they could both convince their parents, well, in Toshi's case, his guardians, to approve it, then they'd not only be able to practice all the strategies that they were learning, but see how they were matched up in a real fight against UA students. He wasn't sure how far they'd get, obviously, since UA students would have way more training than the two of them. But Midoriya was right. It would be a good way to get their names out there and make themselves stand out from the tens of thousands of other kids who would be trying for the hero course next year. Assuming they could actually convince their guardians to sign off on it. He held the door open. He held open the door for Midoriya and waited for him to take his shoes off before leading him back into the kitchen. His foster parents should be home now, and even though they'd be tired from work, there probably wasn't any better time to have this conversation. That didn't mean that Hitoshi was tempted to turn around and run the other direction, rather than risk getting in trouble though. His foster dad was sitting on the at the table reading a newspaper, and his foster mum made dinner, but neither of them saw the two of them come in. Hitoshi scuffed the floor with his heel, making enough non-vocal noise to get his foster dad to look up from the paper. Hitoshi's stomach sunk as he did a double take between Hitoshi and Midoriya before his face hardened into clear, displeased expression. Hitoshi, you didn't tell us you'd be bringing over a friend. Oh, sorry. Midoriya had an innocently guilty expression on his face. I kind of insisted on coming over last minute, and I was totally talking Shinzo's ears off, so he didn't really have time to text you. Right, you're probably wondering. My name is Izuku Midoriya. You two must be Shinzo's parents. Foster Dad frowned, but he looked a lot less angry than before, which made Hitoshi relax slightly. Having Midoriya take the blame for a last-minute visit seemed to be like a good plan, even though the truth was that they planned it. But his foster parents didn't really like him talking to them at all, even though he'd already tried telling them that his quirk didn't work over texting. Midoriya, however, was just as energetic enough that they both decided he might be able to pass it off as an accident. So, you go to school with Hitoshi? Foster Mum asked. No. We met after school one day, Midoriya replied brightly. The kids at my school don't really like me. Hitoshi caught a gleam of satisfaction in Midoriya's eyes as his foster mum found in pity. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Midoriya shrugged but didn't respond. To have the greatest chance of success, they needed to fit themselves into a narrative that his foster parents already believed, namely that Hitoshi was dangerous and that no one would be willing to be friends with him. They would be more likely to believe Midoriya was hanging out with him because he lacked better options, and it was safer than them thinking Hitoshi was somehow manipulating, or worse, brainwashing him into being friends. Hence his careful reluctance, which seemed to be working perfectly. So, Midoriya, Foster Dad closed his newspaper. Are you here for dinner or... Oh! Midoriya grabbed the paper from Hitoshi like he barely remembered it. Yes, I actually wanted to ask you guys something. I'm going to be going to this camp, and I was wondering if Shinzo could come along too. It doesn't cost anything, but we do need parental permission. A camp? Foster Dad hesitantly accepted the paper from Midoriya. What type of camp? Well, it's a kind of training camp, Midoriya grimaced. You see, I kind of want to be a hero, but I honestly don't have a really good chance at it, so this is kind of helped me get a better idea of everything, and see if it's even possible, you know. Foster Dad hummed thoughtfully, but Hitoshi could tell he was still on the fence. And you want Hitoshi to come with you? You know he doesn't have a good shot of being a hero either, right? I think Hitoshi can be a great hero, Midoriya said firmly, eyes widen after a moment as he noticed his slip. But I mostly just want him to be there so I don't have to be alone. It's an entire week and we sleep there, so he wouldn't be home for an entire week. I know that's probably a deal breaker, but nope, that'll work, Foster Dad said quickly, pen flourishing across the paper. Just be careful, kid, okay? Hitoshi fought back a smile as Izuku grinned triumphantly. Don't worry, I will be. Kyoka blew a strand of hair out of her face, only for it to fall right back in front of her eyes. She would have used her hand to brush it back, but both of her hands were kind of busy at the moment lugging around a broken microwave. She had never really been the strongest girl out there, so after less than a week of almost crazy clean the beach routine, her arms already felt like they were about to fall off. She was sure that the extra muscle would be useful and would really help her out in a hero course, but at the same time, this whole training program just seemed kind of illogical. It wasn't that she was complaining. Okay, well, maybe she kinda was, but anybody would be complaining if they were asked to clean an entire polluted beach by themselves. Like, she saw an appeal of building muscle, and All Might had insisted that without enough muscle mass, his quirk would blow her arms off. But there were still some things that weren't adding up. First of all, she wasn't even sure she wanted One for All. Sure, All Might and Recovery Girl both said it's an amazing opportunity, and that if she had been allowed to tell her parents, she had no doubt that her dad would be pushing her to jump in with 2 feet. But for now, all she'd committed to doing was train to receive the quirk. So far, all that meant was a lot of muscle training, which again didn't make a whole lot of sense. One for All focus One for All's focus isn't strength, obviously. Anyone who had ever seen All Might fight can see that much. But at the same time, Kyoka couldn't bring herself to believe that that's all there was to it. Quirks weren't just that simple. Take her own quirk, for example. Sure, it enhanced her hearing, but it also allowed her to project her heartbeat, not to mention the fact that she had a mutation element to it as well. It didn't fall into a neat little category because her quirk wasn't one trick pony, and she was pretty sure that it was true for most quirks. One for All shouldn't be any different. She dumped the microwave in the truck and that they were using and stretched her arms out as she walked back to grab another piece of garbage. All Might was a strong hero, but his go-to solution was usually to punch things, which meant that for him, the solution was always just have bigger muscles than his opponent and force his way to victory by sheer strength and force of will. But well, as much as Kyoka hated criticizing All Might, that didn't always work. When she was singing, muscling through a different passage could do more harm than good. Instead of trying to get stronger in that case, the best thing to do was improve the technique and airflow so that she can get a good quality sound without hurting herself. It was the same with her instruments. A guitar couldn't be made out of the strongest wood on earth, but if the player didn't know how to use it, it would still sound terrible. There had to be some technique elements to using One for All, and that she would be preparing in it. There had to be some technique elements to using One for All, and that she should be preparing for in addition to just building muscle. Kyoka sighed and picked up a tire. Maybe she was just overcomplicating things. All Might seemed to be doing okay for himself, and he only focused on muscle strength. Besides, who else was she supposed to ask? All Might had insisted that One for All was a secret that only a handful knew about, so her best option was to probably just keep learning from the master and assume that All Might knew what he was doing. He was the expert after all, right? No, Zuka Uchi. I don't need either of the help. I've had One for All for decades now. I know what I'm doing. She paused as she heard All Might's voice filtering through the piles of trash. She wasn't quite sure where he was, but he was talking loud enough that her enhanced hearing could pick him up easily enough. Even over the sound of the waves, whoever he was talking to obviously knew about One for All, but All Might hadn't ever talked to her about someone named Tsukuchi before. I'm not saying you don't, but they might... Oh, no. I'm not saying that you don't, but they might show you a help. Tsukuchi's voice was distorted in a way that meant that he was on a phone call. Kyoko was tempted to walk away so she wouldn't overhear, but if All Might was going to be giving her his quirk, he didn't have any right to keep secrets about it. I mean, Nana got help from Gran Torino and she was training you, right? Nana only relied on Gran Torino to guide me because she knew what that monster would do to her and to me if she left me without any guidance. All Might said coldly. I can handle this. I'm going to be teaching at UA as well. I'm going to have to learn sometime. Also, Gran Torino is absolutely terrifying. Young Jiro still has a lot of work to her, and I don't want him traumatizing her. What about Narai? Have you even told him you found a successor? There was a very long moment of silence before Almighty answered. We haven't spoken to each other in years, Tsukuruchi. I doubt telling him now would go over very well. Kyoka shifted the tire so that it was on her shoulder, and she grabbed her phone with her other hand, sending herself a message with names All Might and this Tsukuruchi dude had mentioned. Maybe there were other people she could ask for advice. It never hurts to get a new perspective, right? Unlike Hitoshi's foster parents, Izuku's mum actually read the whole permission slip before looking up at them worriedly. This says you might get hurt, baby. Are you sure you want to do this? It's the best way to figure out what being a hero really is, Izuku insisted, grateful for Hitoshi's presence at his side during this conversation. I know that it looks really cool on TV, that every little kid wants to be a hero, but I'm not a little kid anymore. I know this exercise might be dangerous, but it's way more controlled than typical hero work. They have Recovery Girl, who's the best healing hero working right now, and all sorts of other precautions to keep people from getting hurt in the first place. It'll give me a good sense of what the hero industry actually is, and I'd really rather know now if it's really too dangerous for me, rather than figure out in the middle of an actual hero fight where I could get seriously injured. Mum bit her lip and looked down at the paper. So, do you think this exercise will help you decide whether or not you can really handle being a hero? Even though he knew it was coming, Izuku's stomach still sank. He had been the one to come up with the strategy of fitting their requests for permissions to their parents' existing prejudices, but it still stung that the only way to get his mum to say yes was to let her believe that this was the final push he needed to give up on his dream. He swallowed his nausea and forced a smile down. Yeah, that's basically the point of this whole exercise. Mum nodded and Hitoshi turned to Hitoshi. And you're going with him? Hitoshi nodded. It's safer to have someone there so we can watch each other's backs. Mum was tense for a moment, but after it became clear that Hitoshi wasn't going to ask her a question, she relaxed and picked up the pen. Okay, but I need you to promise to be careful, okay, baby? Don't take any unnecessary risks, and if there's someone you don't think you can beat, just run, okay? Izuku nodded as he glanced over at Hitoshi, who just looked as happy as relieved as he felt. Don't worry, we'll make sure we can win. Alrighty, so that was the end of that chapter. I am going to try to upload more. I'm not going to promise anything because I have not been the best. Stay healthy, stay safe. If you enjoyed, I'm glad. And if you have any opinions on how I can make this better, let me know. Alrighty, people. Thank you for listening, and I will catch you later.